Okay, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about higher education issues for U.S.-born youth of undocumented parents and DACA youth in South Carolina. South Carolina Appleseed is a nonprofit that's dedicated to advocacy for low-income people in the state. We do policy work, advocacy work, class action, litigation, and we have a website if you want to check us out, scjustice.org. Now, I first want to start talking about U.S.-born youth of undocumented parents and some of the issues they face when it comes to college. For U.S.-born youth, they're just like any other youth out there that's a U.S. citizen. They can go to any college they want. What gets tricky is if they are a dependent youth versus an independent youth. And dependent youth is typically someone financially bound to their parents. Parents claim on their taxes. An independent youth is someone that can meet the FAFSA rules to become independent. And this is a high bar. We do have the FAFSA link in there, and once you download this, you can click on all the links, and it does go through what you have to do to be independent. Now, sometimes colleges can override this determination and declare youth independent, so that can happen. I did have that happen to myself when I was in college. So what we're going to focus on is for youth who are dependent because they have the most issues in this state. In South Carolina, dependent youth, their rates and their scholarships, you must be a resident of the state. But for dependent youth, the colleges look at the residency of the parents also. And what our state law says is people without legal status and certain other aliens with certain statuses cannot be residents. Doesn't matter if they've lived here for 20 years. And that causes problems. The Commission on Higher Education has issued guidance regarding U.S.-born youth of undocumented parents and how they should be treated. This came out of quite honestly, we sued the state over this. And this guidance came about after we sued the state on this matter. And you'll see here, I have the links, but also in your uploads, I have the handout that is actually from CHE that explains what they are telling colleges to do. And it's very clear that if the parents can show they've been here at least 12 consecutive months living in the state and have it as their home, they can be considered residents for these purposes of tuition and in-state and scholarships for the kids, for the U.S.-born youth. Now, I won't go through everything with you because I know you can pull down the PowerPoints, but the youth should be able to prove they are residents of the state. They may have a driver's license. They've been going to high school here. They have transcripts. They may have all sorts of documents documenting they've been living here, medical records, all sorts of things that they can pull up and give to the schools. The parents may have mortgages and leases in their names, utility bills. They could have paid taxes through an individual tax identification number, which I'll address later. And there's other things they can prove that they have been living in this state with their kids and raising them here. And the guidance says that the schools have to look at both and not just declare U.S.-born youth an out-of-state resident due to their parents lacking legal status. And that way the kids get to keep their scholarships and get the in-state rate. Now, I will tell you something we had to deal with a lot working with the youth, and is a lot of times the colleges ask the parents for a state driver's license or ID. They want that because they think it is further evidence that the parents are residents here. And what happens is because parents without status cannot get a driver's license in South Carolina, they go and get a driver's license where they can. You can imagine when they present this to the school's reaction is, oh, your driver's license says it's from North Carolina. You must have a home there. You're not a resident. That's understandable. We have had numerous discussions with youth about this matter and told them just tell the truth. Your parents don't have a South Carolina ID or a driver's license, and say, what else can I show what else can I give you to show my parents are residents of this state? And so we're really trying to drill that into the youth's head because it causes major issues. And we're hoping that more and more of them become aware of this. If a student is classified as out of state, they need to find out why. And if possible, they should get it in writing. And they should ask how to appeal and what the time deadlines are. Normally, it's a very short turnaround. We did an administrative appeal for a youth, and we had to really get that paperwork turned around. And we had the hearing less than a week later. So it is a quick turnaround. Most youth know early on from the college when they're classified as out of state, not only because they are told, well, you owe us this much more money, but typically they get an email or a letter. Every youth we've worked with has received that. So it's very important that they pay attention and figure this out. And what we're finding is a lot of times the youth have either presented a parent's out-of-state ID, or when they're asked by the college, what proof do you have your parents are residents, they just ignore the school and don't send anything in. So we're trying to also educate the youth to stop doing that. I am going to move on to FAFSA next. And some of the issues that we see, we are finding that more and more U.S.-born youth of immigrant parents are really just having trouble filling out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is complicated, but the instructions, the FAFSA itself, are in Spanish and English. The FAFSA website is in Spanish and in English. So it's actually a really good website. We're finding that the youth, when they see that their parents' social security numbers are required, they are not doing things correctly. Now, this is despite the fact that the FAFSA in the instructions and on the form actually says if your parents do not have a social security number, put in all zeros. So we're trying to figure out what the issue is there. Instead, what we see is youth, and sometimes, I'll be honest, I had one kid who didn't know. He put in a social security number that his mom said was hers, and he didn't know she didn't have status. Of course, she got flagged because it wasn't her number. Or they're putting in social security numbers their parents have somehow obtained to work under. Again, they get flagged. They're making mistakes on taxes in the way that they file them. This causes the school to flag parents and tell them they have to go back numerous years and redo their taxes. And there's a whole list of problems that the FAFSA people run into, but in particular with the U.S. born, it is the social security number. Or they are typing in the I-10 number, which is not correct. And the instructions are excellent on that. So that's something to be aware of if youth are having issues, if they get flagged. And what happens typically is if they get flagged, they can go back online, open their FAFSA account, and type in all zeros for their parents' socials. And we try to be as strongly worded as possible about fraudulent social security numbers. I've even had conversations with youth about, if you really think your mom or dad doesn't have status and they're giving you this number, explain to them what the problems will be. We've also had a few youth whose parents sold. The parents always like to tell me they rented out because I think they like to make themselves feel a little bit better. But they've sold their kids' social security number for others to work under, and they did it when the kids were really little. And then when the kids enter their social security number into the FAFSA, they get flagged because the FAFSA's like, well, whose income is this on here? You have more money than you said. And it also runs in the youth problems with E-Verify in South Carolina, which is a database employers have to use to make sure you are authorized to work in the state. So the youth also run into issues with that. They do have to talk to the FAFSA people and straighten that out. Sometimes they may have to file a police report that their social security number was stolen. It's obviously if there shows they were earning money at 5 years old, we know it's not them. But the FAFSA people are going to insist that something shows that before they will continue with any kind of aid. A lot of youth say, well, if I put in all zeros for my parents, how do I prove their income? Well, there's a number of ways they can do that. In South Carolina, it's not likely, but you might get an employer to write a letter saying that they work for them. You might have some 1099s, bank account statements. If they filed taxes under an individual tax identification number, which is a number the IRS gives out for people who don't have legal status to pay taxes, even though the federal law says if you're not here legally, you're not supposed to be working, the IRS doesn't care, and they will give you a number to pay taxes under. And the I-10, it's just like any other tax return. It shows you're paying taxes in South Carolina. It shows you're a resident of South Carolina. And we do have the link there about I-10s. You just can't enter the I-10 number on the FAFSA form. But it is a very good way to show the parents are paying taxes, what their income is, things of this nature. And a lot of parents do use those. We also advise the youth, you're probably going to have to go meet with the university officials and talk to them about income and how your parents can prove it. And we always tell them, the government wants to know how much everyone can contribute financially, and they don't want anyone to get any aid they're not entitled to. So that's why they have to know everyone's income, what they can provide, to make sure someone doesn't get too much money from a Pell Grant or things like that. So that's the reason they always want to know. And again, if anyone has any questions, just make sure to type them in and I will answer them. The next thing I have lined up to talk about is DACA, and I will explain what DACA is and the issues that they face in South Carolina. Okay, we do have a question. Can the I-10 be used to establish residency for in-state tuition? What it does for the school is show the parents have been paying taxes here and are considering themselves South Carolina residents. For youth who, depending on their legal status, it probably would not work. For U.S.-born youth, it would help, though, with their parents. For example, when we talk about DACA, I think that DACA using an I-10, which they wouldn't have to because they have a social, but someone who's undocumented using an I-10 would still not be able to show residency on their own. For example, a mama who's trying to go to college, who's completely undocumented, paying taxes through an I-10, she would not be able to meet the residency rules for the universities here, not only because primarily because she's undocumented, and our state law says if you're undocumented, you can't even go to a public school. So for the parents' purposes, what the commission is looking at and wanting is proof of residency. And when you file South Carolina taxes in a situation with the U.S.-born youth and the undocumented parents, they will take that as one factor in proving residency for the parents. And hopefully that explains it. If not, let me know and we can follow up on that. Okay, now we're going to talk about DACA and higher education issues in South Carolina. DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Now, there are two programs, and we're going to talk about the one from 2012, and here's why. There was another program in 2014, and that would have made it apply to more people. However, that was in litigation. It technically still is in litigation. The United States Supreme Court, because they only have 8 justices right now and not 9, had a tie vote, which means DACA, as we call it, plus or expanded DACA of 2014 is on hold. There were several groups, including our own state attorney general, who sued to block it. And at every hearing, they did win, except for the U.S. Supreme Court, where they just didn't have enough justices to vote and had a tie. For the party that wants DACA to go into effect, DACA Plus, including the Department of Justice, they are now figuring out what they're going to do. If they will ask the Supreme Court to review it again once they have 9 justices, or if they have to go all the way back to Texas, where it originated, and get a ruling on the merits. Right now, we just have a ruling on an injunction to block it. Nothing on the law. Nothing saying DACA is illegal or unconstitutional. So it could go all the way down to Texas, go all the way up through appeals, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court again before we get a ruling on the merits. And considering that the lawsuit was filed before the program went in effect, this is 2016, that was 2014. You can imagine how much longer it might take. We don't know when we will get a new justice on the Supreme Court. It's probably going to be with the new president, and we'll have to see what happens. So that's why we're focusing on DACA of 2012 only. And if you hear about youth talking about DACA of 2014 and wanting to apply, please let them know it's a scam. There's nothing to apply for. Anyone who wants to know more on DACA, we have the links in here that breaks down everything you could possibly know. And USCIS, the immigration officials, do have all this in Spanish. So people can go to the Spanish website they have, and they have an assistant, I believe her name is Emma, who will talk to you in Spanish in a little chat box. I've tested her myself, typing in questions in Spanish, and she actually does a really good job. So they put some thought into that program. For DACA of 2012, the youth had to have been brought to the U.S. before age 16, no legal status, lived in the U.S. since at least June 15, 2007, not been coming back and forth across the border or leaving the country, in school, graduated from high school, has a GED, and they threw in was honorably discharged, but you actually have to have certain legal statuses to go into the military, so I'm not sure why that's in there, but that's what the policy says. No felony record, no significant misdemeanors, no multiple misdemeanors. Significant misdemeanors are typically criminal domestic violence, things that are considered fraudulent, DUIs. Also, a big one that sometimes people have done is sign forms saying they're U.S. citizens when they're not. That is a major problem and will almost disqualify you for everything out there possible for immigration status. The youth had to be physically in the United States on June 15, 2012. That's the date that the program was announced. Now, this program is something that the president started, which means it's not been passed into law. Congress would not take a vote on it. What that means is the next president can take DACA of 2012 away. Right now, the benefits of DACA are legal status for 2 years, then must be renewed continuously, fingerprinted every 2 years, protected from deportation for 2 years, can get a work permit for 2 years, are allowed to receive a Social Security number, and in South Carolina, they can enroll in state-funded colleges, but they will be charged out-of-state tuition. They can, of course, enroll in private colleges. So this is for now. Now, whoever becomes the next president can do away with this entire program, so keep that in mind. We are getting a lot of youth who are calling and saying, what do I do? We're telling them to renew. Renew, 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 until we know otherwise. I do think legally it could be a little bit difficult to take this status away from people that already have it, but you may get some youth who are scared. We've really had to encourage the kids to renew, and we've tried to explain to them, would you rather go back to what you had before, where you couldn't work, you couldn't get a South Carolina driver's license, or keep going with this and just see what happens at the next election. So you may get some youth that question you about that, and our advice to them is just to keep renewing, and to renew well in advance. don't wait until 2 weeks before your DACA expires. The way that they will know when their expiration date is up on DACA is their work permit has the date on the front. And in South Carolina, your driver's license is tied to when your visa expires. So their driver's license would also not go any further than when their DACA expires, and they could know by that. Because a lot of youth also call and ask that question and don't know where to find it. So if they just look on the front of their work permit, their employment authorization document, the date's on there. So the bad part for DACA, at least in South Carolina, is they will be charged out-of-state tuition. It doesn't matter if they're dependent or independent. This is all state-funded colleges, including technical colleges. We have found that with some colleges, and I don't think they advertise it, but we have found with some colleges, if the university gives them money, private money, for their academics, sometimes they will consider them in-state residents. Now, like I said, colleges don't actively broadcast this, but I have talked to a couple youth who have managed to do that. I've also talked to a couple youth who managed to go to a tech school for 2 years, paying out-of-state rates, and then had certain four-year colleges say, oh, you were there for 2 full years, we're going to recognize you as in-state. Again, they don't advertise that, but I know the youth who have done it. So that is something to think about. That is something that the youth can talk to the universities about, especially when they can show, yes, this is my home, this is where I plan on living. The other issue we come up with is FAFSA, and this is a federal law. The federal law says DACA youth cannot get any kind of aid under FAFSA, period. But when you look at the Department of Education's website, they tell the youth to still fill out the FAFSA, which confuses many youth. And they feel like, well, why should I fill it out? I'm not going to get any aid. And they have this whole guide, and it's attached, your financial aid and undocumented students handout, that explains why they should fill it out and how to fill it out. Youth get very tripped up on this form because the DACA youth have to check very specific boxes. They have to check the box that says they are not a U.S. citizen and they are not an eligible alien. They must check both. And then what the Department of Ed is, the U.S. Department of Ed is recommending is they want the youth to do this so any college is on notice. This kid's going to need extra money. Do you have any private money you can give them? If so, they're going to need it because we're not giving them anything. And that is a federal law. So even the federal government doesn't give them a lot of benefits. Because DACA youth are not considered residents of South Carolina, that means they can't get certain scholarships like Life and Hope or anything like that, unfortunately. And, we're looking into this. Is it possible to change some of these things? It's going to be difficult, I'll be honest, for a lot of reasons. And the other thing that we're seeing, and this is also difficult, and this is actually partially because of the federal government's fault, in South Carolina and many other states, not just ours, DACA youth cannot receive professional licenses from labor licensing and regulation. These are things like cosmetology and nursing, and they have a litany of other fields on there. And we have their website link in there, and when you download it, you can see everything they regulate. The reason for this is the following. The federal law says that a professional license is a public benefit, which to me legally makes no sense, but that's what the federal law says. And DACA youth are not eligible for public benefits, so therefore they cannot get professional licenses. The only way around that is if a state decides, oh, I don't like that law, let's change it. And we're going to say DACA can get professional licenses. I will say, talking to legislators at our state house, that is not likely. And also, I do not think it's likely because our office has had to sue the state twice over immigration policies, including a policy the majority of our legislators passed, and our governor signed, saying that undocumented battered women could not even go to domestic violence shelters, and that Good Samaritans could be arrested for giving someone who didn't have legal status a ride, even if they were taking them to the hospital. Now, we won on those issues, but you can imagine the atmosphere at the State House if they don't want battered women to go to shelters and people to get rides to the hospital without charging someone with harboring. So what we are trying to tell youth is this. Think about what kind of profession you want to go into. If it's on labor licensing and regulations list, you are not going to be getting licensed anytime in South Carolina for that. Doesn't mean you can't go to school for it, but you may need to move and take the exam somewhere else and then see if you can get reciprocity when you wave back in. I've counseled numerous youth on this who none of them find out until after they graduate, which is sad. And I've encouraged all of them to take legal action. None of them took me up on that. And then I encouraged all of them to maybe move to North Carolina or Georgia or somewhere else, take the exam there, and see if they can get reciprocity here. None of them have taken me up on that either. So hopefully more and more students are learning about this. I have spot checked various college websites, and more of them are posting notices on their website saying, attention, DACA youth, things of this nature. If you take this course of study, you will not be able to get licensed in this state, and then they link it to labor licensing and regulations guidelines. And then the colleges typically put something like on there. But you are welcome to take classes. That is fine with us, but just know you may not be able to get a license. So hopefully more and more youth will become aware of this and know that in advance. Now, DACA youth can get all the private grants and scholarships they want. For many of them, legal status doesn't matter. MALDIF, which is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, has that link where they list various scholarships. A lot of times the scholarships are out of state, but they do have them listed for different schools. We did have a DACA intern in our office a few years ago that went to a private college. She went to Columbia College, which is a college for women during the day. They offer co-ed classes at night. Columbia College did not care that she had DACA. They actually, because of her grades, gave her a full ride. That's their choice. They can do that. They're a private college. So there are some schools out there in this state that do recognize the need for aid and will work with the youth, and the youth really need to sit down, think through this, and figure out what colleges might work with me, what might help me. We're working with a youth right now who has been offered, even though he has DACA, a private college is trying to help figure out how they can get him in their school. They want him, quite frankly, for his soccer skills. And they want to figure out, well, how can we make up the difference with tuition? And what kind of private money, because they can give private money, can we give this youth to make sure he plays on our soccer team? So he's going through that right now. They're trying to figure it out. He is probably going to sit out for a year and work, and they're all going to work on that problem together. But it's good to know that some of the colleges, even though it's for sports, are looking at that and wanting him to go. The other options that these youth may have are, quite honestly, looking at other states. Other states sometimes have better laws, and that's not surprising. The National Immigration Law Center has a great handout about other states, and the link is there. Once you download it, you can click on that link. What other state laws are, what the residency rules would be for DACA. Some of them, like for example, a lot of times California doesn't care about status, but you had to graduate from high school there sometimes and things of this nature with art. Our youth couldn't meet unless they moved residency early on and didn't graduate from school here. We do see more and more DACA youth, unfortunately, due to all these problems, not being able to go to school right away and working, which is fine, and saving money or going to school part-time, but at least they're in school and trying to get there. And we're hoping that more and more of them will continue to renew, and and not be afraid of what might happen with the presidency, and look at this as their best opportunity to be able to have this future that their parents want them to have. Now, I went through that quicker than I thought I would. Does anyone have any questions? So we had the I-10 question earlier. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the box. And if you don't want to type your question in the box, you can always email me. Somebody else is probably thinking the same thing you are and just don't want to ask. So that's okay. I'll give you a few more minutes just in case somebody wants to type something in. And what I'm going to do here is put the slide up with my contact information, and that will go directly to me. The question is, will you send this PowerPoint? They want to share it with guidance people. You should be able to access the PowerPoint. It should be in your box. You should see a handout that talks about the CHE guidance. There should be the PowerPoint in the box too, under the handouts, and then the financial aid about DACA youth. If for some reason you don't get that, let me know, and I will just email it to you. But let me know if it's not in your handout box there on the side. You should be able to click on that and download it. We can send all the handouts in an email if that would be easier. What we can do is test it and make sure the files aren't that large. We may have to send it in 2 separate emails if the files are too large for your system, but we can definitely send that out in an email, and then you will automatically get a link to the recording of this. So if you want to share the recording with people, for others that we sent this invite to that were not able to make it at all, we will also be sending them a link, and they will just have to go to YouTube though, whereas you'll actually have this in a separate format. But we can send all the handouts to people. Another question. What is the status of the law for students born in the U.S. to undocumented parents? Yes, that was our lawsuit. And what we did was we ended up settling with the state. We were not able to actually tweak the state law, but instead had that policy change that's in your handout that tells colleges how they should treat these youth, that they can't just flat out deny them in-state tuition and scholarships. And there's a lot of, quite honestly, legal reasons we couldn't get the law itself changed, but have the policy. And what we have done basically with that settlement is let numerous groups know that if they don't follow the policy, there may be more issues for them. So it's just very technical legal reasons we couldn't get the actual law changed in the code. The guidance, though, from CHE is supposed to take care of that problem. I've worked with several youth this year, as has our co-counsel, Southern Poverty Law Center, counseling youth and I can say every youth I have worked with who is enrolled right now has received in-state tuition in all their scholarships. So if there's someone that hasn't received that, I need to know why. We did have some youth that called me that never followed up with the college. And I said, well, if you don't submit any documents to the college showing your parents are residents, of course they're going to charge you out-of-state tuition. What do you have to show your parents are residents? Oh, okay, you have a lease with their name on it. Oh, you have all your school records showing that mama's next to contact with all that. All the medical bills for mama's paid and she's lived here. Okay, great. So we kind of walk them through that. Okay. Yes, let me see here. Okay, we have a question about what is happening with DAPA, and that's a good question. DAPA is Deferred Action for Parental Accountability, and what that program would have done, and that was also instituted, let me phrase that, it was issued in 2014, and that was part of DACA Plus, or expanded DACA. And DAPA would have helped parents who have U.S.-born children or children with green cards who met a number of rules, including living here for well over 5 years, no criminal records, not considered a security threat, had numerous litany requirements. What happened was when our AG and numerous other AGs sued to stop expanded DACA, they also sued to block DAPA. And so that's in that same lawsuit that Texas ruled the preliminary injunction on, and then the next court kept the injunction in place, and then our U.S. Supreme Court had the tie vote, so the injunction's still in place. And so the next steps will be, will the justices be willing to take it up when they get 9 justices, or do the current parties, and they still have a time frame to do this right now, do the current parties have to go back to Texas, ask for a ruling on the merits, and go all the way back up? I can tell you Texas will probably rule against them on the merits, and that's why a lot of groups have urged DOJ to ask Supreme Court of the United States to hold off and review it when they get a 9th justice. So DAPA is, that's what's happening with DAPA. And if you hear of any parents trying to give money to people, please know there is nothing to apply for. They will get ripped off. The best thing that we can tell parents and anyone who's interested in DACA Plus, or the expanded DACA right now, is to keep gathering documents to show they've been living here. To gather money they may need to pay in the future if it goes through at some point, or if the next Congress decides to pass a law. To get their birth certificates, their passports, any kind of documentation proving identity in order. They'll need their passports because when you go to an immigration appointment, you have to have ID to get in. If you don't, they will turn you away. And they also, many times when you get legal status of some sort, stamp your passport with that denotation until you get the paperwork in the mail. They will need to, make sure they stay out of any kind of trouble, in things of this nature. So that's the best advice. It's not the, great news, but it's the best advice we can give anyone who's interested in DAPA or expanded DACA, and not to give anybody any money. A local attorney actually had to go on to the Latino radio stations and tell people to stop giving money to notarios, who are not lawyers, but many times claim to be lawyers, who were going to trailer parks and knocking on doors saying, oh, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor. No, they didn't. They tied. So that's something to be aware of. The next question involves, do you need to pay someone to apply for DACA? Basically, do you need to have a lawyer? The DACA paperwork is not that challenging compared to applying for other legal statuses. We know many youth who've done it on their own, including the intern we had about 2 years ago. She did fine on her own. I don't know if all youth would. The and the forms are pretty clear. The only things that could get youth tripped up, and I will send this out in an email, I'm making myself a note. One of our national resources made like a little interactive, almost like game, where you go in and it says, "Do I qualify for DACA?" And you go in and you answer all the questions, and if you get to certain points that may trip you up and make you not qualify, it will come up in like a big red box. You should get a lawyer. I will send that link out. I've tested it by putting in all sorts of fake information, and I've put in things to either make me clear for DACA or really mess with that system and make me say, oh, you cannot qualify for DACA or you need a lawyer. The biggest thing we've seen youth probably not know is what border they came across, because that's asked, but their parents can tell them that. As long as the youth have never been arrested for anything, and we always expand it out even further than that. Have you ever had any contact with law enforcement? Have you ever sat in the back of a police car? Have you ever had any issues with the SRO at the school? We really expand those questions out to make sure we get all areas covered. Have you ever been questioned by the police? Have you, things of that nature. And all the youth, when we did a pro bono clinic for youth a few years back, none of them had any of those issues. They were all in high school and so had not had those opportunities. You may have some youth that run into this, and we did have this happen with an immigration lawyer I know. The youth came into the country with her parents. She was maybe, 2 years old when she came into the country from Mexico. She applied for DACA. She did not know, and we recommend youth have very honest conversations with their parents, that when they came across the border, they were caught. They were given an immigration hearing date to be placed in deportation. Her parents skipped the court date. She was 2, so of course she couldn't go to court by herself. But what happens is when you skip immigration court, you're given an order of deportation in your absence. It is valid. Her parents never told her that they skipped immigration court. When you apply for DACA or any other immigration status, you have to be fingerprinted. For the kids who are in the Columbia, they have to go to Charleston. And a lot of the kids in that area would go to the Charleston office. Kids in the upstate, typically you're going to go to the office in Greer. When you go to get fingerprinted, they know immediately if you have any order of deportation. This young lady just happened to have her lawyer with her for the fingerprinting. And immigration immediately, as soon as her prints popped up, said, "You have an order of deportation. We're arresting you right now." It happened when she was 2. It was not her fault. The lawyer fortunately begged and said, "Listen, she was 2. Please let me, take her home and we'll figure this out." And the lawyer was able to fix it for her, not for her parents. So that's something to consider of why they may need a lawyer. I recommend the youth have some very strong conversations with their parents about that and explain, I really need to know before I go down and get fingerprinted and risk getting arrested. The other thing that can happen at the immigration office is this. If the youth obviously do not have a license, the parents probably don't have a license. I'm realistic, I know they're driving. What I recommend though is the youth use their passport from their country to get into their appointment. Immigration doesn't care about that. As long as it's a valid passport that's current, they'll let them in with that. I never recommend that the parents go into any of the fingerprint appointments with them, just because they're not applying for status. Even if they have their passport, I don't see a reason for them to be in there for that. I understand that may scare the youth. I have gone to fingerprint appointments with youth. It is very quick. You're in, you're out, as long as there's no red flags. They are very strenuous with ID. You run through like you're in the airport for security. They check all your bags. you know, you name it, you're ran through security when you enter that immigration building. And that's why I've told parents, if you don't have to go, maybe sit out in the car. So that's something to think about. Also for the parents, or if they can find someone who's licensed to drive them to the appointments, that would be even better. I'm trying to think of anything else that comes up during the appointments. Those are the main things that have come up during the appointments with immigration officials for DACA youth. And so we really recommend they think about that. I have actually had teachers take DACA youth down for their fingerprint appointments in Charleston, and guidance counselors and social worker types who wanted to make sure they got there safely. And for DACA youth that have the immigration appointment, anyone who has an immigration appointment, the letter tells you when it is, tells you when to be there, tells you to bring your ID, and it tells you to bring your appointment letter. Even though when you show up at the immigration office and they know you have an appointment because you're in their system, if you don't have your appointment letter, they won't let you in. For one of the youth I went with, I had the appointment letter, she had the appointment letter. It had both of our names on it, me as her lawyer, and I couldn't put my hands on it immediately but knew I had it. The immigration officer was actually not going to let me go through security because he questioned if I really had an appointment. And unfortunately, I found it, but also the notice had mine and her name on it. But that's how strict they are. So you also need to do that. It does say in the letter, if you need to change this appointment, call this number. I would never recommend that. I mean, we had one youth call and say, I got my appointment letter, here's the date, I may be in labor that day. Okay, that's a different story. We asked her if she could get proof from her doctor that she could not drive to Charleston and all that, and to submit that with immigration. Didn't want a chance of her going into labor, driving to Charleston. But other than that, you better have a really good reason to change that appointment date, because immigration is backlogged. So that's something else youth may want to consider. We never recommend that. That's the only time I've ever told someone, no, you should not go to that appointment, but get proof from your doctor that you actually could be in labor that day and you should not be sitting in a car. So that's something else that comes up frequently is, can I change the appointment date? No, please don't do that. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or anything that you're thinking about? I will email out that link that kind of walks youth through, kind of tells them if they need a lawyer for DACA. It's very interactive, a neat little tool. And I will email that out to everyone. And lawyers did put that together, so I'm not worried about it being done by someone who doesn't know the law. And also, like I said, I went in there and made up crazy facts to test it myself. Okay, well, I appreciate everyone joining, and we very greatly appreciate you working on this, and appreciate all the work you do with these youth, and we know it's a lot that you're taking on working with these youth. We're glad that you're taking on the task and wanting to learn and being there as our allies. So thank you, and we are going to end the webinar, and we will send everything out via email for those that need that. And also we'll send out the link. So again, thank you so much.